Hello there. My name is Keith Langley, and I worship in the Elmit Trinity benefice. I'm going to look at today's reflection in just a moment. There's a reading which teaches about anger, and then I will be reflecting on that afterwards. But just before doing that, Jesus himself is recorded as getting angry on a couple of occasions, and I have reflected on that in a previous reflection. If you want the details, contact myself or Hilary and we can get that to you. But for the purposes of today's reflection, I'm going to assume that we're just talking about the other kinds of anger, those occasions when anger isn't justified. So I'm going to unmuddy the waters, if you like, before we actually start. So we're just talking about unrighteous anger. Let's share the screen so we can look at the reading together. There we go. It's Matthew chapter 5, verses 20 to 26. And obviously, as you can see, it's from the Good News translation. Jesus says, "I tell you then, that you will be able to enter the kingdom of heaven only if you are more faithful than the teachers of the law and the Pharisees in doing what God requires. You have heard that people were told in the past, 'Do not commit murder. Anyone who does will be brought to trial.' But now I tell you, if you are angry with your brother, you will be brought to trial. If you call your brother, 'You good for nothing,' you will be brought before the council. And if you call your brother a worthless fool, you'll be in danger of going to the fire of hell. So, if you're about to offer your gift to God at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. Go at once and make peace with your brother, and then come back and offer your gift to God. If someone brings a lawsuit against you and takes you to court, settle the dispute while there is time, before you get to court. Once you are there, you will be turned over to the judge, who will hand you over to the police, and you will be put in jail. There you will stay, I tell you, until you pay the last penny of your fine." In the last 15 months or so, we've had to get used to a lot of changes. We've had, in particular, changes in the law, rules, legislation, changes to help stop the spread of the pandemic. So we've had, for example, you now have to wear a mask when you're going into a bank. A bubble isn't just something that you find in your washing up bowl. And the rule of 6 is no longer just the number of tackles you're allowed in a game of rugby league before a turnover ball, or the score a batsman in cricket gets if he hits the ball across the boundary without it bouncing. And people generally have been quite compliant with these new laws. Yes, there are exceptions, but most people have gone along understanding the reasons why we have to do these things. So perhaps it's time for another law to come in. Let me introduce you to a government white paper due to be published next month, proposing yet more changes to the rules that govern our lives, this time not to do with the pandemic. There's a proposal that anger will become illegal. The idea being is that if you're caught being angry, then there's an on-the-spot fine of £100, reduced to £50 if you agree to take an anger management course. Let's go back. We'll come back, to the government white paper later in my talk. Now, yesterday, Sue Hayward-Giles gave us her thoughts on the verses immediately preceding today's gospel reading. And you might recall that earlier in the year I did a swap with Sue, and ironically, the reading that she reflected on yesterday is the one that she would have done had we not done the swap. But having agreed that swap earlier in the year, I found that I was doing a reflection on that passage of scripture, having already done it in, I think it was about August of last year. In other words, what was happening is that we've had the same piece of scripture, and 3 times it's come up in our daily reflections. And I'm guessing it's not the only one. And that's one of the problems with the Bible, is that we get familiar with it. It seems it can lose the impact because we get familiar. It's a bit like watching a movie with a surprise ending. Trouble is, we've seen the movie before, and the surprise ending isn't quite such a surprise after all. So, let's think about the context in which Jesus says these words. It's the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is in front of all these people, and pretty much all of them will have been Jews. And they will have been familiar with the law of the Old Testament, that in yesterday's reading, Jesus says that he's not come to do away with, but he's come to fulfill it. Now, I would imagine that it might be difficult to remember all the laws of the Old Testament, but there's one set of rules that stand out. That it's almost as though someone's gone along with a highlighter pen. I suppose if they'd had highlighter pens in those days, they might have done that. And that's the 10 Commandments. They are, if you like, the flagship of all the Old Testament rules. And of course, one of those is, thou shalt not murder. And I would imagine that the listeners to Jesus, when he was doing the Sermon on the Mount, will have been within their comfort zone. Yeah, murder, not guilty. I am not, haven't broken that particular one of the 10 Commandments. However, Jesus in today's reading is effectively saying that anger is tantamount to murder. Now, hang on a minute. All of a sudden, you've gone from the situation where most of Jesus' listeners, probably all of them, are feeling quite happy that they haven't fallen foul of that particular commandment. All of a sudden, I think just about everyone there would think, hang on a minute, I have been angry with people before. It would have sent shockwaves across his listeners. Okay, maybe it's time now for me to go back to the government white paper. It's not true. You probably gathered that. It's my attempt at a 21st century parable or metaphor for the words of Jesus, trying to recreate some of the shockwaves that those early the people who were listening to Jesus would have felt. And I don't know how successful I was with that, of course. It's not true. But let's imagine, just humour. This is school, but primary school playground. Let's act it out. I'm the Prime Minister, and you're the children, and you're all the people, and I've just announced that this law is coming in. Let's imagine it's true, that anger is going to become unlawful. Would it change our behaviours? Would we become a less angry society? And think about crimes which are illegal under current UK legislation, which are fuelled by anger, knife crime, acid attacks, domestic violence, brawls in public house car parks. You take anger away. If you get people to learn to control their temper, maybe, just maybe, we might see less of those quite serious crimes. Let's just close with a short time of prayer. Jesus, make us channels of your peace. Where there is hatred, where there is anger, let us bring your love.